There's nothing like a good bourbon to round off the year, but which brands have excelled in 2022? Since a liquor can only be categorized as bourbon if it follows precise guidelines, there's very little flexibility when it comes to the production process. But while bourbon must be aged in new barrels, not all distilleries immediately bottle their bourbon upon removing it from the barrel. In fact, some take production a step further, including Angel's Envy, which often finishes its bourbon products with additional aging in port wine barrels.
Finishing whiskey really excites us because we're taking a traditional product like bourbon, and we're kind of taking it at our own twist on it.
The 11th edition of its cask strength whiskey is no exception, with that final step helping the 2022 release become one of the year's best new bourbons. Described by Angel's Envy General Manager Gigi Dadan as the distillery's most highly anticipated annual tradition, this year's cask strength bourbon contains a number of sweet notes. A brown sugary sweetness can be detected in the 2022 cask strength scent, while various fruit flavors, including oranges, are noticeable on the palate. Earning a fantastic 9 out of 10 rating from Drink Hacker, it seems clear Angel's Envy 2022 cask strength bourbon was worth fans' anticipation. A name like Blood Oath may scare off the less adventurous, but that doesn't seem to bother the bourbon brand's creator John E. Rumpy, nor did it prevent the release of Blood Oath Pact No. 8 in 2022. The 8th version of Blood Oath's limited edition series is actually a blend of 3 different bourbons, each aged between 8 and 14 years. This means that the Blood Oath Pact No. 8 is one of the best new bourbons of 2022, and one of the best blended varieties as well. Featuring the scent of cinnamon and notes of butterscotch on the palate, the Blood Oath Pact No. 8 is bolstered by the unique bourbons used by Rumpy in its production. Additionally, one of the whiskeys in the blend spent time in Calvados casks before bottling, giving this limited edition whiskey distinctive apple flavors, particularly in its finish. Earning an 8.9 out of 10 rating from the Whiskey Consensus, as well as a superb 9.5 rating from Drink Hacker, there's little reason to doubt your potential enjoyment of this 98.6 proof liquor. While any of the new bourbons released by Booker's this year could be worthy of inclusion among the greats, arguably the best of all is the Lumberyard batch. A 7-year aged bourbon, the Lumberyard batch contains whiskey aged in several different warehouses and appears to be a strong contender for the best sweet bourbon out this year. The scent of this bourbon is heavy on vanilla, and the sweetness doesn't stop at the aroma. According to Drink Hacker, the bourbon is so sweet that it's somewhat reminiscent of a homemade baked good in both scent and taste. This fits with the bourbon's 4 out of 5 barrel review from Breaking Bourbon, which described a pecan pie type flavor found on the palate. Earning a 9 out of 10 rating from Drink Hacker as well, Booker's Lumberyard batch is clearly no slouch among 2022 releases. When it comes to blending bourbon batches before bottling, there's clearly a method to the madness. Need proof? Take it from the folks behind the Four Roses 2022 limited edition small batch bourbon. Featuring 4 different bourbons, each aged between 14 and 20 years, the 2022 limited edition small batch was one of the best new bourbons released during the year, and quite possibly the woodiest of all. An initial wood-like scent is noted by the distillery, with Drink Hacker finding a charred oak aroma almost instantly upon sampling. Slightly sweet vanilla notes can be found on the palate while drinking the 2022 limited edition small batch from Four Roses as well, with all roads leading towards an oak-heavy finish. Considering bourbon is always aged in new oak barrels, that flavor profile is hardly unique. But with an A- grade from Whiskey Reviewer and an 8.5 out of 10 from Drink Hacker, it does help make this 109 proof whiskey one of the best new bourbons of 2022.
Cheers.
It's easy for a company to declare that it cares more about the quality of its products than the quantity sold. Following through on that belief is far more challenging, however, but it's not impossible, as demonstrated by the Buffalo Trace Distillery in 2021. After all, while its annually released George T. Stagg bourbon is a widely acclaimed release in the whiskey world, the 2022 version is actually the first to hit shelves since 2020, because the distillery didn't believe its 2021 product was up to snuff. In the eyes of bourbon connoisseurs, the anticipation after a long absence helps make the 2022 George T. Stagg release all the more welcome. While this year's version somewhat altered the expected flavor notes from the past releases of the 15 years and counting aged bourbon, that didn't seem to diminish the enjoyment found in this sweet-scented, slightly vanilla-tasting whiskey. All in all, this bourbon was clearly worth the wait. Considering it received a 4.5 out of 5 barrel rating from Breaking Bourbon and was described by Whiskey Bible author Jim Murray as one of the whiskeys of the year, there is no doubt it's one of the best new bourbons released in 2022. It may not be old enough to vote, but the 17-year-old barrel-proof bourbon from Heaven Hill Distillery is more than equipped to deliver for the seasoned bourbon drinker. The inaugural entry in the Heaven Hill Heritage Collection series, this new release is actually a blended whiskey featuring both 19-year aged and 20-year aged bourbons alongside the 17-year aged namesake. And with a 4.43-star user rating on Distiller as of November 2022, it's obvious that this combination makes for one of the best new bourbons released in 2022. The oak-scented, sweet-tasting product contains notes of caramel in the aroma, on the palate, and in its finish. And according to an A grade from Whiskey Reviewer, the light yet flavorful 118.2 proof blended whiskey is apparently substantially better than the iconic yet notoriously expensive Pappy Van Winkle brand. Of all the newly released bourbons from 2022, none tops the fascinating backstory of Old Forester's 117 Series Whiskey Row Fire. Created using barrels that survived the 2015 four-alarm fire on Whiskey Row in Louisville, Kentucky, this bourbon has been through a lot during its journey to liquor store shelves. Luckily, the final product is as fine in quality as you could hope for.
And I said to them, this will be one of the best things that ever happened to Whiskey Row, this fire.
Less smoky than you may imagine given its history, the Whiskey Row Fire features a wood-heavy aroma along with a notable undercurrent of cherries. Notes of honey and vanilla are present on the palate in each sip as well, with both flavors lingering in the bourbon's finish. Earning a highly respectable 9 out of 10 rating from Drink Hacker, this 100-proof limited edition offering from Old Forester is definitely worth a purchase. If you can get your hands on it, that is. Sadly, very few places appear to have the bourbon in stock anymore, with only 2 retailers selling it as of November 2022. If you can track down a bottle, though, you may just wind up with one of the best new bourbons of the year. A bourbon billing itself as the King of Kentucky needs to back up that claim. After all, while not all bourbon is from Kentucky, as much as 95% of the whiskey is produced in the bluegrass state. Now, we can't say for certain whether the new King of Kentucky bourbon released in 2022 by the Brown-Forman Distillery is genuine royalty. But if nothing else, the 15-year-old whiskey certainly brings the flavor. Packing an extremely potent alcoholic punch, the 2022 King of Kentucky comes in at a whopping 130.6 proof. Or a fairly astonishing 65.3% alcohol by volume, so you won't need more than a glass or two to feel the effects. But it's more than just a sky-high ABV that helps this bourbon win its place. The slightly sweet-scented whiskey received exemplary reviews from multiple critics as well, with a 9.5 out of 10 rating from Drink Hacker and a 4 out of 5 barrel rating from Breaking Bourbon. With only 3,500 bottles produced, the clock is ticking on anyone interested in the King of Kentucky 2022 edition. But if you're willing to make the trek to select stores in and around Kentucky, it's clear that you won't be disappointed with your purchase. As a subsidiary brand under the Beam Suntory corporate tent, there's no denying Knob Creek has some distinct advantages over smaller distilleries, just as Blue Moon's creative credentials aren't affected by its Molson Coors Zone status. However, the stature of Knob Creek's parent company doesn't stifle its artisanal capabilities. In fact, this whiskey company is capable of rivaling any other whiskey brand, as demonstrated by the release of its 15-year bourbon in 2022. Perhaps the most interesting aspect of Knob Creek's 15-year-old 2022 release is the coincidental path it took to the market. As Jim Beam master distiller Fred No told Rob Report in 2022, the distillery simply had some leftover 15-year-old barrels of aging bourbon, and decided to release it rather than combine it with other whiskeys. With a heavy dose of oak notes in the scent, taste, and finish, this 100-proof bourbon won't leave you disappointed. Like a number of other successful companies, Wild Turkey doesn't seem content solely with its signature product. Consequently, the distillery has released a number of limited edition whiskeys throughout the years.
No, it's not the only way to do it, but it's ours. And we trust it.
This includes a series of small batch bourbons created by the company's longtime father and son master distillers Jimmy and Eddie Russell. Released under the label Russell's Reserve, these bourbons have developed a reputation for supreme quality since 2001, a streak that continued with its 13-year-old bourbon, which was released in 2022. Containing a fruity and saccharine aroma, the 114.8 proof bourbon doesn't stop with its pleasant scent. The presence of fruit continues on the palate, and prominent notes of aged oak can be found in the finish as well. With a 4.5 out of 5 barrel rating from Breaking Bourbon along with a 4.47 user rating on Distiller, it's hard to find fault with this premium small batch bourbon from Wild Turkey. Not every US-made whiskey meets the requirements to be labeled bottled and bond, which requires a liquor to be aged at least 4 years and bottled at a minimum of 100 proof, among other requirements. Of course, if a bourbon does meet these strict barriers for bottled and bond status, it may choose to advertise as much in its name, as is the case with 2022's Old Fitzgerald Bottled and Bond Bourbon. The 9th edition of the Heaven Hill Distillery's Bottled and Bond series, this 17-year aged whiskey features an alluring scent and a number of spiced flavors on the palate. Notes of aged oak are present in the aroma, on the palate, and in the finish as well, according to a 4.5 barrel review from Breaking Bourbon. Few U.S. whiskey brands can match the popularity of Woodford Reserve. Not only was it the 9th best-selling whiskey brand in the U.S. in 2021, but it was also able to sell more than 1 million cases of its products for the first time that year. Given this positive track record, you'd have expected Woodford Reserve to release some stellar products in 2022. And lo and behold, the honey barrel finish from its Distillery series is one of the very best of the year. As you can probably guess, the honey barrel finish bourbon was finished in honey barrels before bottling, so fans of sweeter bourbons may be more inclined to enjoy this new release. But while the honey flavor is indeed noticeable in its scent and on the palate, it was far from overwhelming according to Whiskey Consensus, who gave the bourbon an 8.4 out of 10 rating in its review. Considering the often impeccable quality of Woodford Reserve whiskey, it's no surprise its honey barrel finish was one of the best new bourbons released in 2022.